Thank you, Kezia, and welcome on behalf of Global Ties Alabama. My name is Jacqui Shipe. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the organization, and we are so delighted to welcome you to our first Global Perspectives Institute for 2022. You know, many of you are probably wondering, if you've joined us before, why we're not having a traditional Black History Month segment. And we are opening up the Global Perspectives Institute series this year with a topic that is very, very relevant: Black-Jewish dialogue. You know, when we talk about Black history, it is a global topic. Many will wonder, is this just a US topic? But Black history is celebrated in Canada, Ireland, the Netherlands, and the UK. But given the growing anti-Semitism facing Jewish Americans, to be more vigilant, I would say, to be more aware, I think it is important for our organization to provide a forum where this discussion about Black-Jewish dialogue can take place. There's a worrying lack of basic Holocaust knowledge, but if you are in the Black community and you look across generations, you also wonder about the lack of knowledge about Black history. So it is so timely for us to partner with our friends at the American Diversity Report. I'm delighted this afternoon to be able to introduce Deborah Levine, who is the editor-in-chief of the American Diversity Report. Now, we'll forgive her that she lives in Chattanooga because she comes to Alabama just like this is her second home. And we've had her for a number of our projects. And this morning, when we were off camera, we had a chance to dialogue. And now I understand why I'm so excited about my sister, Deborah Levine. She too was born in Brooklyn, New York, just like me. And I can't talk about that with everyone. So it's just wonderful to learn something new about her. She is a Forbes magazine top diversity and inclusion trailblazer and an award-winning author of more than 15 books. She received the Champion of Diversity Award from diversitybusiness.com, the Excellence Award from the Tennessee Economic Council on Women, and is featured on C-SPAN Book TV. She's a published author, as I indicated, and her articles span decades in journals and magazines. She is an opinion leader and a change agent because of the tools that she's been gifted to have as a writer and communicator. So we are so fortunate today to collaborate with the American Diversity Report in hosting this Black-Jewish dialogue. We'll have two speakers this afternoon, Deborah and Ken Granderson. I won't tell you how excited about meeting Ken I am today also, since I found out that he too is not only from Brooklyn, but he's in Brooklyn right now. So I'm so excited about our panel, and I'm excited about the expertise that they will bring to us as we have and begin this Black-Jewish dialogue. Deborah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacqui. It's a pleasure to work with you once again. You're right, I've been in Alabama quite a few times, in Huntsville, and it's always a pleasure, always. I hope that I get to go there soon again. I know that COVID has prompted us to be online a bit more, which isn't all bad. It gives us this opportunity today to come together across the country, really, to speak about these things. Would you like me to speak first or introduce Ken first?
Why don't you introduce Ken and then begin your presentation? We will also allow for about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to entertain questions.
Certainly. So Ken Granderson is a graduate of MIT and launched his first software development company, Inner City Software, Brains in the Hood. He was committed to closing the digital divide by creating technology products and solutions by and for people of African descent. For a decade, he introduced Boston's community of color to computers and the internet, giving local organizations and Boston's Black newspaper an online world-class presence. Moving back to New York City, he was born in Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn. His achievements in technical design, education, and empowerment are nationally and internationally impressive. His website, Black Facts, is also an affiliate of the ADR, and you can find all kinds of historical information on that website and ours. It's a pleasure to work with Ken, and we met online. That's where it happens these days. And I was explaining earlier today that my mother insisted that I take computer programming back in 1965. Okay? And I did as I was told, or else. Now keep in mind, my mother was a very sweet, soft-spoken lady. She grew up in the island of Bermuda, which at the time was a British colony, now called a Commonwealth. And I also was brought up there. Bermuda is beautiful, but back in the day, it was as segregated as the Old South. It was indeed. And my grandfather, who was one of the first professional realtors there, hired the first Black woman in the front office. And he placed a small, everything's small there, at least it was, small strip mall where the Black community and the white community met so both could shop there. He is called one of Bermuda's founding 400, and it's a reminder that all of us are basically history. We think it's just every day that we do something, we go places, but it all makes a difference. He was, his family, his father was one of the first people to bring refrigeration to the island. And it was something that the family was used to first. My father, who had been a US military intelligence officer during World War II, interrogating Nazi prisoners of war, moved us to Bermuda so we could grow up there, but we came back to the States, to New York, to be part of the Jewish community, something that Bermuda has struggled to actually create over the years. I was the only Jewish little girl growing up on that island. I understood what it was like to be the only one. And coming to New York was quite a culture shock. But learning about Jewish history at that point was really very shaping for my future. The interesting part of it was that my brothers were what we call bar mitzvah. I was not. We had little money, and it was the boys who did that first. Now, I'm not going to accept that necessarily. And so when I got to Harvard, one of the first things I did was to enroll at Harvard Divinity School. And what I learned there was being Jewish was quite different than what I thought the world saw us as. And my interest in history picked up even more. As time went on and I became the executive director of Jewish Federations, the interfaith, interreligious director of American Jewish Committee in Chicago, I did more and more about the Holocaust and Jewish history. And in Rockford, Illinois, of all places, I made my first film about the Holocaust. And in it were people who were like Anne Frank, hidden in attics as Nazis came to destroy everything in their community. And also there were people who were the liberators and shared what they saw, which was horrifying. And then there was a nurse who talked about the medical needs of the people in those camps, those death camps, at least the ones that survived. And I made a movie of it for our classroom. And I talked to my dad, who I knew had served in the war. He said nothing until I took the job at Oklahoma, at Tulsa, after the Oklahoma City bombing, and was told I should train Holocaust survivors to speak about what they had seen to the media, since the movie Schindler's List was coming out and they needed to hear from people. I called my dad and I said, you know, these people haven't said anything. And he said to me, well, neither have I. I said, excuse me? And that's when I found out what he had done during the war, about what the Nazis had done, and how he said that he could tell what people were thinking, were doing, just by looking at the books in their bookshelves, what they were reading, what they were exposed to. And somehow, no, that hasn't changed. Yes, it's online, but it's what people are seeing and reading that is shaping the mindset of today. And the neo-Nazis, right, that I saw in Tulsa in the 90s, right, are very similar to what we see today, except they have incredible access to the internet to spread what they are saying, what they are doing in terms of conspiracy theories. And people are looking at it and wondering, did the Holocaust ever happen? How many really died in the Holocaust? And the last time I spoke, I taught in a high school class about the Holocaust. I asked the children, the kids, it was high school, why are you here? This is an elective that you didn't have to take. And one young lady said to me, I wanted to hear both sides of the story. And I was very concerned. What other side did she mean? Huh? And so I read to her my father's letters, which he had announced to me, left in a file cabinet in his closet, so that they could hear the firsthand stories of what he had seen during the Holocaust, what he had heard, the kinds of terrifying hate, unlike anything he'd seen before, and just unable in many ways to speak about. It was so harsh. Only recently have we seen on, I think it's PBS, stories about a particular place called Fort Ritchie, right? My dad was part of Fort Ritchie. It was a group of people, Jewish mostly, who were trained because they had a background in German, French, right? To go over to Germany and to be able to be intelligence officers, gathering where the enemy was and how to best deal with it. I never knew that until I saw the letters. He was what they call a Ritchie boy. The idea that you would send a Jewish boy over to Germany as a spy in World War II is amazing. And what he was able to see and to write about in his letters, right? In particular, opening up the Nordhausen death camp and describing thousands of bodies being piled up in a dark cave and saying the smell would never leave him. In his retirement, quote, he became the chief financial officer of the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, dedicated to making sure that this history would never disappear, would not be diminished. And when we see that school districts are banning Holocaust books like Maus, I have to wonder what he would do if he were still alive today, because he has been gone a decade. And what I say to myself is, he isn't coming back, but he has you. And it's my job, right, to make sure that the history is known. And so I keep going and I share those letters. And I tell you, they never fail to make me unnerved to hear what my dad saw as a young man in his 20s. Skinny guy, and to see in his discharge papers from the military that called him a spy. Not once in all our years did he ever call himself that, but that's what he was. And so we have to pay attention to these firsthand stories. Too many of these people are gone, but there are many of us left who can share it. Thank you, Daddy.
Thank you, Deborah, for such a personal testimony and journey that you've traveled. And so now we are favored to hear from Ken. And Ken, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. And, because the general topic is, Black Jewish dialogue, I'm gonna, was thinking about some of the different interactions that I've had with the Jewish community from growing up in, I sometimes say the neighborhood formerly known as Do or Die Bed-Stuy, because it was very, very Black back then. It's been gentrified a bit. So we did not really see Jewish people in the neighborhood, unlike Crown Heights, which was one neighborhood over, where you had a lot of Jamaicans and Hasidim living, right next to each other. A lot of even, cross-cultural folks, like some entertainers, etc., who've synthesized both cultures. But we really only saw Jewish people if they tended to be landlords or shop owners. So from that perspective, as a small kid, I did not run into that many Jewish people. But when I started going to a school down in Brooklyn Heights, St. Anne's School, which used to be Episcopalian, but it was independent long before I went there, many, if not most of my classmates were actually Jewish. And so I grew up around, some Jewish kids, some of whom I'm Facebook friends with today. And also there were some other interesting interactions from the standpoint of my grandfather on my mother's side, as well as my father, who had interactions that led them to basically get to purchase real estate, to learn how to purchase real estate. And so, my grandfather, I don't even know how many places he owned. It was rumored he had like 10 properties way back then. But I know that literally a few doors down from me is a brownstone he got in the 40s that, my cousin has lived his entire 63 years there now. And, my dad had 4 properties. My brother has one. He sold all but one that my brother has now. And, and that was, I know my dad, he worked for the post office, but he also did handyman work and stuff. And, I think there was an attorney named Hochberg who helped him, learn how to do real estate. And then there was the Dan family who was in Long Island, who I remember we got a chandelier from them. I think my first dog came from them. And their son, they owned a clothing factory in Poland, and their son Jeffrey, who's a kidney surgeon in Massachusetts, and I were the same size. and I actually got suits from them. And one time I had a whole, like a half dozen or so, wool suits that because we happen to be the same size and stuff. And, and those were really, really cool kind of, interactions that, and especially with the property, that have, helped folks in my family have a certain level of stability from owning property that so many other folks, don't have. I'm actually of Caribbean immigrant heritage, so I am aware of and but more from an intellectual than a family history level of understanding that many Blacks in the South were cheated out of having land, were terrorized off of the land, and those realities from a long time ago, are very real today, because I understand. I live in a brownstone, that my brother bought with the help of my cousin, because I understand how property can stabilize a family. I've got a bunch of cousins who are in the 6 apartment building that I grew up in, that was one of my grandfather's, 2 commercial spaces. They've never had to think about housing insecurity their entire lives, because they were able to have real estate. So that is something that is absolutely, can define the path of your family. So when people, talk about, we should have reparations, and other folks say, oh, no, that was a long time ago. A lot of those repercussions get baked into the path of your family's opportunities and your realities. And so, even though I've said, if there was ever any sort of financial reparations, I don't qualify, but I understand it's really important because these things did happen, they matter, and they impact people to the present day. And I also mentioned, being of Black Caribbean immigrant heritage, my grands from both sides of the family came to the US in the 20s and were basically like merchant class folks. And back then, a lot of your immigrants only could make it to the US if they were, a certain middle class, or folks who came from, say, African countries, probably worked in industries or government or whatever. So they tended to have a lot more resources and be able to do a lot better than many of the Black families who have been here for centuries, who never had those kinds of opportunities. I didn't realize that until I went to college and started running into a lot of Blacks from the South who, because of because of things like segregation, Black communities in the South, you had everyone from, the hoodlums to the judges in the same community. And I met Black students who were 2nd, 3rd generation, like teachers and doctors. My family were basically civil servants, working for a post office like my dad, a transit cop, store owner. But I met Black folks from the South who their parents did, were like doctors and, professors. I'm like, what? Black folks can do that? It's just an interesting dynamic where I started to realize that some of the diversity in the Black community, and like I said, back then, this is 1980. Back then, not that many folks from some of the African countries, but the ones who made it there were pretty much like, upper middle class, they had a different sort of sensibility. And this was all very interesting and very educational in terms of my understanding of what it meant to be Black, because I did not realize until I went to college that, I was only exposed to, one segment of the Black community, and there was a lot more. And a lot of these other folks, their music sucked, and and they ate things that were funny. But that's the case with all cultures, where where, it's easy to think of folks as being all the same, but the reality is that there's a lot of diversity in different communities, and it's just been an interesting journey. Earlier was mentioned now, I started off in technology with a company I called Inner City Software. Actually, that T-shirt on the back is actually back there is actually an Inner City Software T-shirt. I digitized a Black history book called African Americans in Boston, More Than 350 Years, and built a piece of technology to drive that, like it was like a CD-ROM searchable kind of thing in the 1995. And what I built for that, I sold to some other software development companies, and including one called LiveLink Systems out of Jerusalem, who used it to make a CD-ROM version of a product called the Encyclopedia Judaica. And I remember working, this was dial-up modem and emails and stuff. And I don't remember Yaakov's last name, but I remember talking a lot with a fellow named Yaakov and made some changes for him. That was another interesting sort of, intersection. And so in '97, as large amounts of Black Americans started going online for the first time, because I lived in the tech world, I created blackfacts.com as basically the first online Black history encyclopedia, and putting out Black historical articles and news. And we just started doing videos a year or so ago. And we actually have over 700 Black history videos, including videos for every day of the year, and 12 different subjects, including like Black women in history, Black history heroes in general, in terms of, because we understand and experience and live different sorts of intersectionality. In addition to women, we've got a series called Afro-Latino Trailblazers, Caribbean Revolutionaries, LGBTQ Pioneers. And thanks to a session of Deborah's that we went to, we're working on a series called Black Jews, because she had a series that my business partner Dale and I, she had an event where we were just like, oh wow, we didn't know that. Oh really? Whoa. So we're working on a video series of Black Jews. So yes, in addition to Sammy Davis Jr., there are a lot more, because I grew up knowing about Sammy Davis Jr. And so, so that's another interesting intersection. Stay tuned for that. And as a tech person, sometimes it's good to, it's good to be wrong about certain things, but something that myself and many tech people really had it wrong is that back in the 90s, we thought that having computers available to everyone was going to solve the ignorance problem. And unfortunately, we were completely wrong about that, because while I understood, and I've been very passionate about technology because I've lived a life that has shown me that technology is an amplifier and an enabler of you to get your voice out there, et cetera. Similar to other kinds of technologies, they can, depends on who's driving them, right? And, technology, it's an amplifier of anything. And it is being used now to amplify ignorance and hate at a level that none of us imagined. And, it's like, holy cow, like we can't believe that what we're seeing today, where people are trying to, erase Black history. At Black Facts, we sometimes say, we're the solution to historical erasure of Black achievement, but wow, it's like folks are trying to literally say certain things didn't exist. There are a couple of articles that I had glanced and looked up, because folks say things more concisely, than I can, because I'm long-winded and I'm about to start to be quiet soon. So one that says, so the folks who tried to prevent a Black girl from going to school in 1957 are opposed to their grandchildren learning about how they tried to prevent a Black girl from going to school in 1957. And that Black girl is not that old. This is not 200 years ago. This is not, Ruby Bridges is not, she's still alive. Another one, if Black children are old enough to experience racism, other children are old enough to learn about racism and how to be an anti-racist. So while there's a lot of emphasis and energy around, the idea of not, ultimately, not having white people feel uncomfortable, it's what's so crazy about it to us is that we're not trying to make anyone uncomfortable. We're just trying to say, hey, these are things that happened. Just like, quite frankly, when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, there were Africans who were complicit in that. And, and it's like nobody's hands are clean, and none of us were there. So it's never been about, oh, you're bad or whatever. It's about, hey, this is what happened. And we need to understand what happened so that we can prevent these things from happening again. If I may borrow a phrase, never again. And I want to maybe close with a saying from one of my favorite Kens, Ken Burns. Being an American means reckoning with the history fraught with violence and injustice. Ignoring that reality in favor of mythology is not only wrong, but also dangerous. The dark chapters of American history have just as much to teach us, if not more, than the glorious ones, and often the two are intertwined. And so that's from the wonderful Mr. Ken Burns, my second favorite Ken.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ken. I'm so thankful that you talked about intersecting identities. And just a quickie, about 3 years ago, we were hosting a delegation from Israel, and I was really excited. It was about a dozen individuals. And when they showed up at our office, we were shocked because it was Black Jews who happened to be Ethiopian. Mm-hmm. And it was Passover time, and we had to get special meals for them. And it was just fascinating. And when they would arrive at any of their professional meetings, everyone was shocked because they did not think about Ethiopian Jews. So it was definitely an eye-opener for all of us. Recently, there's been this discussion about race and ethnicity. I won't talk about the show where this became a major issue. So I'd like to ask the two of you if you would just share a bit about race and ethnicity. What does that mean? Why is it important for us to pay attention to our language, but even more importantly, our knowledge, so that our language is more accurate? Either one of you can go first.
Oh, Deborah, you're muted.
Okay. The definition of a Jew has been complex over the years, and it has fallen under all of these categories: ethnicity, religion, race, and all of them are true. But it has been the race issue that has come up recently, whether or not that is part of us. And I will share that back in the late 1800s, there was a book called Protocols of the Elders, and it posed Jews as a race. That was picked up by Hitler and the Nazis, Jews as a race, an inferior race. And it is something that is, I don't know what you call it, popular in certain circles today. And you can see it online. You can see if you look at some of it that it was said that the Jews were a race that were invented, created by God, but are really by the devil. It's amazing to me how this has spread, and I will share with you that I personally have been targeted by neo-Nazis online, and I can't say I'm surprised. but it is something that is not exotic anymore. It is part of it. And in many ways, we've wanted not to be a race to try and avoid this kind of persecution. And yet to not have that race category applied to us takes away some of the issues that we need to address these days in terms of who we are and what is happening here in this country and elsewhere. It's certainly not just in our country. So there is a push and pull around this, and it's none of it's pretty. Let's put it that way. None of it's pretty.
Right.
Ken, do you have another
Yes.
anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. And let me pull out my scientist hat, and say, I think the root cause of a lot of the challenge is that the whole concept of race is non-scientific. It's make-believe. It's a social construct. There's one race, it's a human race. And, but these different groups who, to a large extent, may look different because most of our ancestors were, pre-airplanes, were in very different places for thousands of years. And so, yeah, you look different. And humans seem, I think, more in the past few centuries than before, like, have gotten really fixated on that. As someone who identifies as Black, but also, is in support of the National Association of Colored People and the United Negro College Fund and Black Lives Matter, it's like, these terms are imprecise. That none of them speak to a specific kind of thing. Also as someone who says, yes, you know what, I am, of Caribbean descent, but, on my paternal grandmother was half Chinese. And on my, on my mother's side, we've got some Scottish folks back there, whatever. It's like, there is nothing that's, pure, whatever. And anytime you try to do some sort of purity test, you generally go to Jim Crow kind of racist things, one drop of blood, and, non-scientific. It's, these are social constructs. So I think that ultimately we need to abandon these designations as trying to think that they actually mean anything, but at the same time recognize, acknowledge, and celebrate the different ethnic groups and our histories, etc. What I've tried to do as someone in the role, part of my intersectionalities or whatever, is that I am a cisgendered heterosexual male who has tried to be an ally to women and LGBTQ folks. And what that usually means is that when I'm in places that are just cishet guys who say ignorant stuff, I'm the one who says, yo, bro, that's not cool. Right? And so at the same time, I have accidentally misgendered folks. I made mistakes. So I think that the most practical thing for us to do is recognize that none of us are perfect and you're gonna make mistakes, but if you make a mistake, so, in the scenario that you're, not mentioning, Jacqueline, I think the undercurrent is that for many Black people, race has a very specific sort of meaning. And it's like, well, you know what? Other folks can pass, but most of us, if your name ain't Lena Horne or whatever, you can't pass. So, so race means brown skin, period, end of story. And that's not necessarily true for a whole bunch of other folks. So we're gonna make mistakes. If we make a mistake and someone checks us on it, we need to be humble and say, oh, I'm sorry, teach me. And as long as we're willing to learn, I believe that that's the best we can really try to do is I'm stopping because I don't want to use I'm going to use this phrase, but it's not in the way that it sometimes is used, both sides. When these things happen, both sides need to be, be a little humble, and the person who may have accidentally stepped on toes, be humble enough to recognize you didn't mean to, but you may have offended someone. And the other person who got offended, don't get mad and attack. Give them a chance to correct. Maybe only give them one chance. If they come back, well, then maybe you gotta hit them or jump off the top rope verbally. We're not condoning violence. We're not saying punching white supremacists like Richard Spencer is a good thing, even though that video's popular. But anyway, I think that if we can agree to, recognize that we're going to make mistakes as a society growing up and giving voice to different groups who have been robbed of their voice, it's not a perfect, path. There's gonna be bumps on the road, there's gonna be hurt. As long as we can, acknowledge and try and correct and say, teach me, tell me what I should have said. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay.
Great. I'm just going to mention one more thing, and then I'll open it up. If our audience has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat. This conversation about the difference between race and ethnicity does play a major part in our communities if we think about the census process. So in the 97, Hispanics and Latinos were not considered when it had to check off whether or not they were a race or ethnic group. In 2020, they were considered as part of a race. So our systems, which in the case of census leads to funding for certain communities, it's incredibly important that we have these kinds of open discussions and in some way influence our elected officials to catch up with the conversations. And so I'm really appreciative of this. Are there any questions among our audience? We just have about 3 more minutes before this will end, but yes, Micah?
Yeah, thank you very much. I very much enjoyed both the presenters. They are very heartwarming, and but they still didn't answer some of the questions in which I came here looking for. The most important, and Jacqui, you talked a little bit about it. In order to fix something, first of all, you have to talk about it and not skirt around it. You really, and then you also have to establish rules and facts. I still don't know, you have to cure racism or call a person racist, you have to identify what is a race. Do we have, Caucasoid, Negroid, or do we have Mongoloid, which, most scientists for the past 150 years have said that it was. So, who's what, when, and where. Now, if modern scientists now, as Ken also iterated, that we have the human race. So therefore, everybody's one and the same. So we just have to determine, and then what are the rules? So that wasn't addressed, and I wanted it to be addressed. So you have to, because we're still skirting around the issue. And I came here looking for, a structure with rules, and I didn't get it.
Yeah, no, Micah, thank you very much. And quite honestly, there is one more topic that I alluded to when I first spoke with Deborah, because one of my board members has asked me to ensure that one of our GPIs deals with the issue of critical race theory. And so we don't have a lot of time to deal with this, but it is a critical issue. And Micah, I see your hand. So do you want to follow up on that?
On critical, people don't really understand what critical race theory is. Exactly. I, as a lawyer who's understand, it is a very sophisticated philosophical thought by, written and examined by lawyers who have been professors for 10, 15, 20 years. It is not Black history, so they have to get those two things separate. These folks who are not intelligent have used it and use it as a smokescreen. There's just nothing worse. And so that's why I said, guys, it's pretty simple. Understand the rules, put it in a box. But when people start throwing smoke screens out there, nothing can happen. Party A is yelling at Party B. So that's all I just wanted to say. So we've got to define, in order, to cure an alcoholic, you got to admit that you are an alcoholic. To get over this problem of race, we've got to have structure and define who's what, when, and where. Is it culture? Is it ethnicity? Is it religion? Or is it, I have no idea. I have no idea what the rules are anymore, but we know that everybody's mad and yelling. Yeah. And I'll shut up.
And no, it's fine. And a couple of things. Number one, this definitely dictates to us, Global Ties Alabama, that we have to have a second Global Perspectives Institute. We had already been planning this, but this is certainly affirmed by your comments. And number two, I'm going to ask Deborah and Ken to use this as an opportunity for closing remarks, but stay tuned because we will have and my board member is on the call, so I hope he's hearing this. We will have a critical race theory type of focus in our next GPI for Black History Month. And so thank you, Reggie.
Yes, I do hear you, Jacqui. I hear you. Thanks.
So Deborah and Ken, Reggie, do you want to say anything, or Deborah and Ken, do you want to lead into closing remarks?
No, I think they did a beautiful job. Thank you all so much for enlightening us.
Thank you. Thank
I'd
you.
like to say one thing, and that is, if it were possible to have a structure about race in particular with the laws and the rules and this and that, it would happen. But the reason it hasn't is because there is so much emotion, so much history involved. And so the different groups come together and change those rules daily and obscure them and throw clouds of who knows what at them online.
We can't allow them to control the narrative. Cooler heads must prevail. Don't allow them to control the narrative. Really simple.
That's very key. We must have a voice to counteract that. That's why I wrote this book, When Hate Groups March Down Main Street.
Unfortunately, they're there. I'd love to read your book. That's a great title, by the way. I love it. And unfortunately, it's reality. It's reality right here today. And that's what's scary, because good folks have sat by and done nothing. And they've got us fighting amongst each other, and we're really on the same side.
Yep.
Right. And you know what? I think that what Mike is speaking to, well, first of all, some thoughts about the definition of race thing. I'm going to say that in a minute, but I tend to be like a root cause sort of thinker. You know, what's the real root cause? One of the challenges that I've seen for decades is that, you know, well-meaning people is the problem of asymmetric warfare. Well-meaning people like to play by the rules and not get their hands dirty. And I'm not suggesting that you should, but you have to understand that you're dealing with folks who have the mentality of scorched earth terrorists, where they do not care what the collateral damage is. They will say and do anything to achieve their objective. And I don't claim to have a solution in mind, but I think the first step is recognizing that when you are trying to address things with progressive principles and say, oh no, we're not going to do that, you know, that you're going to find yourself in an asymmetric warfare position, you know, because, you know, the other side is not playing by the same rules. And so I believe that until folks of goodwill figure out how to respond, I'm not sure how quote, we end up winning. You know, it may mean being in a constant state of being uncomfortable and fighting and pushing back. I do not know.
The answer is easy. Allies should ally. Allies should ally and come together. It's very simple. This little whoopee stuff is diversion. We're
Right.
not the problem. We're not the issue. We're allowing that little crap, which is really insignificant, you know, to destroy us. Remember, enemy hates people who are not like them, period. And whether we be Jewish, Hispanic, African American, or Native American descent, or Asian descent, you know, we are not them, you know. And also, I also put, it's just not a race, but I believe it will be reaching out to the allies who are progressive whites, you know, and there are many of them out there who have been with us from Jump Street. That's what's going to win it. There are more good people than bad, but we've allowed these bad folks to control the narrative. And it seems as though,
I'll just say one last thing about that, and that is, yes, we have to come together, but yes, we have to magnify our voice. Absolutely. That's why I have all these articles on the AmericanDiversityReport.com, and you're welcome to go look at them for free and submit. That's why I'm doing a radio theater play about Jewish history, and I'm writing a TV pilot script. We have to get up and not just dialogue, but get it out there. And that's why.
But Deborah, you have to be very inclusive. You know, something you just can't say it's Jewish only. You also have to reach out to Muslims. You also have to reach out to everybody. This is a human problem. This is hate is a human disease. It's a human disease, and you have to be inclusive. You have to be inclusive for everything. You know, threat to justice from one person is a threat to justice everywhere. You know, and we're all victims, and we all have to come together to achieve, you know, some sense of respectability as humankind, as mankind.
And I think that this conversation is exactly what you're talking about, you know, where, you know, Deborah identifies as Jewish. She's got a thousands of years old cultural history that I don't necessarily personally relate to, but, you know, it's interesting, it's fascinating. And, you know, I don't need to be from that culture to value it, you know, so so I'm happy to, you know, ally with her while still
total
recognizing
for everybody. Yeah, total respect for everybody. Total respect for everybody. You know.
Yeah. So I'm saying
I personally don't do organized religion, but I believe that as long as there is respect and tolerance for everyone, that's spiritual in itself. But when people organize and say, "I'm right, you're wrong," unless you believe with me, I'm bailing, and there's a whole lot of that.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, hey, I identify as a secular humanist, so I have no dog in any religious fight. You know, I am
as long as they're respectful. As long as they're respectful.
I'm interested, right? If you are a person of goodwill, looking to make things better for people who are living now, I'm with you. You know, all those other things we can argue about those things over coffee later. But let's make the world better for folks now.
So ladies and
Do
gentlemen,
you make things better for folks right now? Do you make it out of childhood when the child is 4 or 5, or do you do it when they're 20, 25 years old?
I definitely. Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, I think many of us see that when kids are kids, you know, they don't make those sort of distinctions. You know, they learn that. I'm actually very hopeful of generations, and maybe it's because I am in a, you know, more of a liberal kind of, you know, environment where a lot of kids are growing up with folks from different cultures, different backgrounds, different sexuality, and the kids seem to be like, yeah, so what? And it's some of the older adults who have issues.
Our attitude,
so ladies and gentlemen,
response to things like this, that our kids are growing up the way they are, and the continued bigotry and hatred continues.
So ladies and gentlemen, we really, from a Global Ties Alabama standpoint, just appreciate this dialogue. It has to start with conversation. It has to start with dialogue. We're very, very committed to providing the forums. In fact, our board of directors will be joining at 4 o'clock today for diversity training. It's continuous improvement. And the topic for our diversity training will be social inclusion and inclusive language. This is the leadership of our organization. And every one of us has to identify opportunities to magnify the right voices. Right. So stay tuned. Global Perspectives Institute will be back before the end of the month, and we will continue this dialogue with addressing the issue of critical race theory. Thank you so much to Deborah and Ken. Yes, Ken? And
I want, one maybe closing thought. I think that if we, regardless of who we are, where we come from, if we can just focus on one thing, I think can be the foundation, is practice radical empathy. When you encounter someone who's different from you view as different, ask yourself, if I were them, if I lived their life, if I, quote, walked in their shoes or moccasins, how might I view this? I believe if you consciously practice that, we can start building some of these bridges.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great closing note. Please, if there's any information, any additional questions that you'd like to pose to Global Ties Alabama, we'd be delighted to have you do that. And stay tuned for our next GPI. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.